I got my timer here to make sure I don't start getting dangerous hand warning signs from Nathan. All right, so, hey, look at that. Oh, sorry, I forgot one very important thing. So my email address is ksargeant@templeton.org. A lot of ways to spell Sargeant, so I'll leave that up just for a second before I move on to the next slide. But so in the 12 minutes I have, I'm going to try to give you the who, what, when, and where about funding from the foundation. I don't really have time to go into more of the why we're funding particular areas, but if you're interested in that, I'll be here after the session. All right. So maybe here's the shortest why is here's a list of some of the scholars at SPSP that we funded over the years, including Adam Cohen will come up next. You're going to give me the signal, like if I need to leave the room or something, or anyway. Anyway, so I'll talk a little bit about some of these projects, but we're well represented here. So why are we funding them? What is the connection? So I'm going to step back 1 second. So some of you may know that John Templeton was one of the early pioneers of global mutual fund investing, like Warren Buffett before Warren Buffett. Sold his firm and set up a foundation. So our assets are about $3 billion now. That was before the last few weeks of January. So, but we have 75 staff. You can see the numbers there. You'll see the next slide. But I just want to emphasize one thing on the bottom, which is, and he made his fortune as a global investor. So most of our grants right now are to scholars and universities in North America and Europe, but we're really intentionally trying to become more global in our grant making. So the ways we do that, where there are RFPs, requests for proposal competitions, at Western universities that are still studying, let's say, religious change in China, but we're also intentionally trying to build networks of scholars outside of North America and Europe that could develop proposals. Let me just move on. All right, so there's the quick overview. So the reason those bars are going up so much is this is the 5 years after John Templeton's death. He had a phased transfer of his assets to the foundation. So we're now at about our full foundation value. It'll go up and down based on global market developments. But you can see, let's see, our grant making budget is about $150 million a year. So let me break that down. So there's just a quick look at kind of increasing citations of the Templeton Foundation funding. It happened to me at least several times that last year's SPSB, I went to a session, and at the end somebody put, thanks to the Templeton Foundation, like, oh, I didn't know we were funding that, and writing colleagues. So we fund from different program areas here as well. All right. So I'll come back to this a little bit later with the specific dates, but we have a two-stage process where the first stage is writing a letter of intent. It's about 2 pages. It's pretty short. We ask maybe just for a general budget number and a brief description of what the budget's for, but it's basically describe your project, what you're going to do, and why it's important. And I'll get to the dates, but we'll respond to you within a month after the deadlines. So they're the 2014 numbers. We had almost 2,000 letters of intent. We invited about 10% of them. We know proposals are a lot of work, so we try to say no early and save you the time, or give you comments on the letters of intent saying, here are ways you can improve it and submit again. 2014, about 50% of the proposals we invited were funded. 2015, it was a little lower than that. Some of that had to do with kind of financial changes, but those have held over the last few years. So rather than the big numbers, grants in psychology and neuroscience. So last year it was $26 million in grants. You can see the range. A $3 million grant is likely to have some kind of re-granting component, so that there are a lot of projects there that are $150K to $300K. I've learned I really need to be clear about this with folks. When our figures are total costs, so we've had a few awkward conversations with project leaders when they thought the budget was for only direct costs, and that's not the case. So it's good to keep that clear at the beginning. So what do we fund? So this slide here, you could probably link, if we were to kind of link, fade in the names of some of the scholars that we funded. I'll just give you one or two specific examples. So we put together a big request for proposals competition on expanding the science and practice of gratitude. So Bob Evans, Dacher Keltner, and others were involved in developing that, and there were 19 scholars who were funded through that. So there is more information about these on our website. I'm going to say that with a caveat, which is we have developed much better descriptions of all these areas. The date in which that website goes live keeps changing, so I'm not promising anything, but it should be this quarter that there'll be better descriptions of kind of the rationale for why we fund and all these themes. But a lot of these, well, actually you can scan and see which ones might connect with your areas, and I'll just talk with you more afterwards. All right, so we have multiple departments. As you saw in the first slide, I'm in charge of the Human Sciences Department. I have colleagues in Life Sciences, Philosophy and Theology, Character Virtue Development. So I'm going to give you a brief slide on several of these departments just to give you an idea. So for instance, many of the scholars you saw that we funded on the earlier slide were funded by our Philosophy and Theology Department. And part of that is because they're funding, let's say, projects about the nature of free will, where one of the things we really like to do where possible, so it's not in a majority of grants, but is to find fruitful interactions, let's say, between philosophers and social scientists. So Al Muley's Free Will Project is a good example of that. The last one I list there with the website, theexperienceproject.org, also has sort of multiple tracks for philosophers and psychologists and other social scientists. So those are some topics in philosophy. Here are areas in virtues and character strengths. So one of the things that'll be clear with our revised website is in the last couple of years, we've particularly put an emphasis on the first three there. So gratitude, generosity, and humility. Many of the people listed earlier were funded to do that, but there are others. So our character department is doing a lot of work now on developmental trajectories of individual virtues. We're also doing work, I think, in core measure development. So let's say for intellectual humility and gratitude and other areas. But I think one area that's just a cross-cutting importance now to the foundation, we've done a lot of core research support, trying to get much smarter about finding good ways, when there are significant findings, to build connections, translate that to non-academic audiences. So that's the translation for the public part. All right, so another theme, a lot of this is in the Human Sciences Department, but not exclusively, are understanding the nature and function of religious cognition, causal mechanisms, if any, underlying the relationship between religion and health, and then religious cognition and the virtues. So again, I'm just giving you the headlines, and you can, I think, see enough from these to say whether there might be connections. All right, now here's one area I think even people who know the foundation well may not be aware, but we have a smaller program, particularly in genetics. So that's one of those areas where, especially with the revised website, I think we'll have much clearer information for you, as well as a list of the grants that we funded, which is probably the most helpful thing for you, just a place to see whether things are in your area of interest or not. All right, so here's one other area that we've done a little bit of funding in that probably many people aren't aware that it's been something we've been supporting, which is kind of the practice of science, improving kind of the quality and reputation of good scientific work. Let me see if I can even read this from here. Anyway, so those, actually you can read that. So those are two articles by one of our advisors, Mike McCullough. One is about the strength of the findings about ego depletion, and another is about the research on oxytocin. So I'm just going to give you three examples here, and you can ask me more about these areas later. So a second, we've supported the Brian Nosic's Center for Open Science, and the third is the Berkeley Initiative for Transparency in the Social Sciences. So this is a combination of both our interest in intellectual humility and also just improving the quality of science. All right. So that's nice. Here's all the things we fund. Does your idea fit within our mission? So, so some of it is if your work is about one of the themes that I listed there earlier, then the odds are pretty good that it does. If you go to the website and pull down that far right, the philanthropic vision tab there. It's about a 4 to 5 page document that actually describes in our founder's understanding how all these themes connect. So that, in addition to what's on the website or what I've told you, might be one way to learn a little bit more. Oh, there it is. No, this is, I'm not really recommending this for most of you. Most applicants do not need to look at these things, but if you're interested more in understanding the logic but how these areas connect, John Templeton wrote a couple of books describing his vision for it. So, all right, so what do we fund and why? So the kind of the research things you can make sense of, right? Are your methods appropriate, right? Do you have good theory? Is it appropriately powered and things like that? So I want to just draw your attention to two different things. So I'll start with the bottom. So one is there any other buy-in for your project? I know that's an annoying thing people from funding agencies say, right? But maybe the university's providing some lab support. Maybe there's some other co-funding. Maybe you've got some kind of partner, right? Our founder was an entrepreneur, a businessman, and so he really, we all have these ambitious missions, as big as all our budgets are. We're not going to be able to solve everything that we have on our agenda. So the more that it's possible to find some kind of co-funding, even if it's partial, we always look favorably on that. So that's secondary, right, to research quality and the objective review of your proposals. Oh, I should have said that before. So we send proposals out to expert reviewers. Both we select and we ask you to nominate experts in the field. And you get very high quality comments back for the proposals we're inviting. Where did that bullet go? So I think one other area, maybe it's the second one there, is if you look at the program at SPSP and you see that there are 18 sessions on a particular topic, and maybe there's none on yours that you're interested in, and you see how it fits in our mission, we're probably more interested in the one with none than the one with 18 sessions. Now, that's not a blanket rule, but it's just something to keep in mind. All right, it's a one-line slide, so this is a really easy one. So it's basically, you have an email address, and I added internet connection because they kind of go together. So obviously most of our grants go to universities, nonprofit organizations, but we can fund for-profits and can even fund individuals, so it may be bad for you at tax time. But anyway. So here's what you really want to know, the where do you find out more. So on the tab on our website, what we fund, where did it go? There it is, the red circle, apply for funding. Click that. It lets you open an account in our online portal with your email address. And you can work on a submission in multiple times, right? You create an account, you start your idea. You don't have to just submit it right then. So when do you have to submit it? All right. So this is a new change for us this year. We used to have 2 open submission deadlines a year. This year we're switching to having 4 deadlines for small grants. It's actually, the number is 217,400. Why is that? It was 200K, it's indexed to inflation. A few years from now it'll be, 232 something. But, so this is a great way to do pilot grants, planning grants. The one limitation on conferences is that we cap our contribution to travel and lodging at 10% of our funds, so it's not always as good for conferences. But we'll give you answers within a month to invite a proposal. The form is much shorter. It's 1 report at the end of the grant, so we're really trying to streamline just smaller grants. And then the main deadline for larger grants will be this August. You have my email if you want to bounce some ideas off us. That's a good way to do it. Generally, the kind of comments we're best able to give is, I have 3 ideas, which of these is really most in the ballpark? That's what we give a lot of advice on. If you want about your methodology and things like that, we're probably less likely to have time to comment on that. Thank you very much, and I'm going to bring up Adam Cohen from Arizona State to just talk a little bit about his experience working with JTF. Thank you.
Hi guys, I'm Adam Cohen. I'm a social psychologist at Arizona State, and I just have 5 minutes. So what I thought I would do is talk about one or two of the or three of the Templeton grants that I've had over my career. And then if you guys had some questions about what that was like, I think we'll be outside the room after the session. So the first one that I had, this was right when I started at Arizona State. So Janet talked about how helpful getting the grant was in the tenure process. This was something that I was working on as I was getting the job, and I think, that's another way in which grants can be really helpful, is departments are going to think that you're much more likely to get off to a running start if you're bringing grant funding. So don't just start thinking about writing grants, I would say, when you're starting to think about your tenure portfolio. Maybe start earlier than that. So the earliest grant I had, this was actually through the Templeton Advanced Research Program that I got this first grant that I had. And that was on religion and health and well-being. And what was exciting to me about that work, that's always been my biggest interest, is religion and culture, was looking at the positive and negative effects that different aspects of religion might have on health and well-being in different cultural contexts. And so in that work, I went to grad school with a guy named Aranda Jayawikrame. Are you here, Aranda? No. Anyway, he's Sri Lankan. And so we were able to build up a collaboration where we collected data in multiple countries, the US and Sri Lanka, looking at how different aspects of religion, like your faith or your integration into a religious community, might have good or bad correlates with health and well-being outcomes. And so we said there might be some good effects. If you believe that God has a good plan for you, that might have good mental health or physical health outcomes. But people also worry about religion. They feel that people in their religious communities are not helpful to them. Sometimes, there's been a lot of work on this under different banners like religious coping or religious struggles or anger at God, like the kind of work that Julie Exline and Ken Pargament have done. Are there ways that religion actually has negative effects or negative correlates with health and well-being? And I remember being excited about that work because we were also taking a multi-method approach to those questions. We weren't just asking people, are you religious, are you healthy, do you enjoy good or bad psychological health? We were devising these reaction time tasks to try to get a bit more subtle answers to that. So that was some of my earliest work. More recently, with a colleague of mine in political science at Arizona State, we had a grant through the Notre Dame Science of Generosity program. And my colleague, Carolyn Warner, the chair of political science at ASU, conducted, this was a very multi-method, multidisciplinary project. She went to Milan, Paris, Istanbul, and Dublin to interview people in religious contexts, like through churches and mosques and things, to try to find out whether religion prompted people to be generous to other people. And as a political scientist, she was interested in questions like, does this depend on the church-state structure? That's why she went to those different places. In the context of that grant, I got to go to Dublin and Istanbul and conduct priming experiments where we were priming different aspects of religion. Think about your religious community. Think about God. And there were 7 different conditions. One of them was just a control condition. Think about the chair that you're sitting in. And then we gave people an opportunity to donate money to charities or else to keep their experimental payment for themselves. And then the most recent lines of work that we've had, some current funding that we have, is with a colleague of mine, Kathy Johnson. Kathy actually is a graduate of our PhD program. She got a dissertation grant from Templeton to look at links between religious cognition and volunteering and generosity. And she's since followed that up with other grants that she's gotten, looking at whether or not different representations of God that people hold, if you think about God in very benevolent terms, or you think about God in very abstract terms, or you think about God in very authoritarian terms. People vary in these regards, and these are not mutually exclusive at all. Does that link to your propensity to be generous to other people? Does it link to your propensity to volunteer in religious and non-religious contexts? And so that's some of the work that we've been doing lately. I think that's all the time that we have. So thanks.